Good afternoon and welcome to today's webinar, Finding a Common Tongue, Language Learning in the Common Core Era, sponsored by Middlebury Interactive Languages. Today our speakers are going to be Aline Germain-Rutherford, PhD, who is the Chief Learning Officer of Middlebury Interactive Languages. She's also a tenured professor of linguistics at Middlebury College, and she has a PhD in second language education. Other speaker is Christina Johnston, who is the principal of Weybridge Elementary School, and she holds a master's in education. Before I pass things off to Aline, I'd like to mention a few things. At the end of this webinar, you will receive a follow-up email with a recording and a copy of the slides. Finally, if you have any questions, please use the Q&A panel in the lower right-hand corner of the screen and let me know. We will use those for our Q&A panel at the end of the webinar. Okay, and it's all you now.
Thank you, and welcome everybody, and thank you for your participation to this webinar. So I'm here with Christina Johnson in Mount, and we are thrilled to share with you this afternoon our experience about Common Core and language education. So our talk this afternoon is going to be in three parts. First, we'll try to go over a few research results about benefits of language learning and cultural awareness and how it can contribute to students' performance in core subjects. Then we will also discuss the complementarity and alignment of Common Core standards and National Standard for Language Learning. And then we will finish with some concrete examples, first of course design, which integrates Common Core standards and National Standard for Language Learning, and how these courses that we have designed impact in student learning, with concrete examples taken from the Weybridge Elementary School with Christina. So for this first part, what research tells us about second language learning and the benefits of second language learning, that it is well known that learning a second language can have extremely positive impact on learning also other topics. Research has told us that for several years. Here there is an interesting view from Marianne Furchen, who speaks about foreign language study which necessitates the acquisition of new learning strategies because it is foreign. The notion of foreignness and how that notion of foreignness actually drives the learning. And for that, in fact, she speaks about the research that Jean Piaget, the famous psychologist, was doing while he was studying and examining the cognitive development of children. And indeed, Jean Piaget viewed intellectual growth as a process of adaptation through different processes of assimilation, using pre-existing knowledge and schema that we have in our mind to deal with a new information, and accommodation, which is changing the pre-existing schema to fit with the new information. And all of that to bring what he calls equilibration. So for Piaget, and in fact also for Marianne Furchen, equilibration is the force which moves development along and which drives the learning process. I think that notion of foreignness is interesting and is also, in fact, explored by Elena Curtin when she says that the cognitive conflict becomes the catalyst for thinking. The foreign language study becomes the catalyst for cognitive and psychological development in young children because of the conflict that such study presents. In the same frame of mind, actually, in 2007, the National Education Association put an important report, a well-known report, regarding world language education, and this report was called The Benefits of Second Language Study, Research Findings with Citations. And even though this report shows many benefits of second language learning, I've only selected a few here, the main research findings, in fact, and they speak about how second language study benefits academic progress in other subjects, and this is what we'll try to see during this webinar. Narrows achievement gaps, builds higher order abstract and creative thinking, enriches and enhances cognitive development, and promotes cultural awareness and competency. If you read this report, you will see in more details, actually, the different types of research which have been done and the research which, illustrates this finding. Other researchers also in the last few years indicate that children exposed to a foreign language at a young age achieve higher levels of cognitive development at an earlier age, that they show greater cognitive flexibility, better problem solving, and higher thinking skills. So here again, it seems that second language learning doesn't just bring a knowledge of a second language, but really has an impact on the cognitive development of children, therefore helps the learning of other disciplines for children. But recently, I'd say in the last decade or so, progress in research in cognitive science and neuroscience helped us to confirm this previous research about the benefits of learning another language on cognitive development and on the development of literacy skills. And Ellen Bialystok, a researcher and professor of psychology at York University in Toronto, in Canada, is one of the lead scholars in this field. And research in neuroscience on bilingualism really teaches us a lot on the positive benefits of language learning on cognitive development. From research, we show existing evidence which strongly suggests that bilingualism has an effect on cognitive processing, at least for children and younger adults. And bilingual advantages have been reported across a variety of domains, for instance, creativity, but also problem solving, which is quite important. And the way it explains that, and the reason lies in the way our brain works and develops. As she tells us, everything we do, everything we learn, everything we become skilled at leaves its trace on our mind, on our brain, and this is what she is examining. She's looking at, what areas are activated for certain tasks, for bilingual people, monolingual people, to see actually the different ways of that our mind has to network and explain actually differences in behaviors between bilinguals and monolingual people. And in her research, Bialystok explained how the brain of monolinguals and of bilinguals develop different neural networks in their brain, and therefore different ways of dealing with the decoding, retrieving of information. I've put here the link of a lecture that Bialystok gave a few years ago at York University on her research, and I really invite you to look at this lecture. It's very interesting. Again, the research in that field shows is that two languages, how do I say that? It shows that the languages of a bilingual remain constantly active while processing is carried out in one of them, which means that even though you are, using only one language, your second language is still active, which means that here something has to happen. Mind has to select actually elements of the language that you are using. So several models have been proposed to explain this joint activity between those two languages. And model based on inhibitory control is the model which is the most accepted here, in which the non-relevant language is suppressed by the same executive functions of your brain and the same executive function which are used generally to control attention and inhibition. And experiments have been done on that, and maybe you know some of these experiments. One is very famous. It's called the Stroop effect, where participants are presented several words on color, in color, and where the participants have to name the color the word is written in as fast as possible. And the result of such a study shows that lingual children or young adults actually constantly perform better than monolinguals on this task. And a component to explain that is again the way our brain functions in the use of the executive control system, which orchestrates our cognitive processes in the brain. A growing body of research has demonstrated that executive control develops earlier in bilingual children than in monolingual, is more efficient in young adults than in their monolingual peers, and also is maintained better by bilinguals in older ages. Here again, these are interesting studies which show an advantage of bilingualism, but also of learning a second language. So if you have two languages and you use them regularly, the way the brain's network works is that every time you speak, both languages pop up, and the executive control system has to sort through everything and attend to what's relevant in the moment. And therefore, as Bialystok tells us, the bilingual use that system more. It is that regular use that makes that system more efficient. Another example, Bialystok describes a study between monolinguals and lingual children, and in this experiment, children were presented with certain illogical sentences, but which were grammatically correct. The example that she gives is a sentence such as apples grow on noses. Interesting is that the monolingual children could not answer. They were a bit surprised by this sentence. But the bilingual children would say, well, yeah, I mean, the sentence doesn't mean a thing, but it is grammatically correct. So we that the bilingual children found, we found in fact that they manifested a cognitive system with the ability to, in fact, to attend to important information, but also to ignore the less important. The bilingual children were able to recognize grammatical patterns, even though the sentence was not making sense at all, but the monolingual children were not able to recognize anything in the sentence and were just surprised by the sentence. These, in fact, this type of experiments confirm an hypothesis that Jim Cummins, again a professor at the University of Toronto in Ontario, in Canada, made several years ago. And this is his hypothesis of developmental interdependence. And research shows that high levels of first language proficiency help second language acquisition, and conversely, high proficiency in second language has a positive effect on first language development. And so first language and second language literacy skills seem to be interdependent. And they are, from what he says, a manifestation of a common underlying proficiency. So at the surface, you might have, the proficiency of the first language and the proficiency of the second language. But underneath, like in the iceberg, hypothesis, underneath you have common underlying proficiency, which benefits development of literacy skills for both languages. So here again, it seems to say that learning a second language is going to help children to develop the literacy skills of their first language. So Cummins believes that in the course of learning one language, a child acquires a set of skills and implicit metalinguistic knowledge that can be drawn upon when working in another language. In the experiment that I was explaining in the previous slide on these two groups of children presented with a non-nonsensical, non-meaningful sentence and the way that bilingual students reacted confirm in a way the hypothesis of Cummins. So this underlying proficiency provides the base for the development of both the first language and the second language. And proficiencies involve more cognitively demanding tasks such as literacy, content learning, abstract thinking, and problem solving are common across languages. So again, our research findings that were known for several decades, but all the research done in neuroscience tends to confirm these hypotheses. Lastly, the notion of development of the global attitude and cultural competency. I mean, in an age of global interdependence and an increasingly multicultural and multi-ethnic society, can say that early foreign language study gives children a unique insight into other cultures and builds their cultural competency skills in a way no other discipline is able to do. What I think is that during their elementary school years, children are more open to ideas of global understanding. A study of a foreign language and culture can serve as an important vehicle to expand their intercultural views. And according to many child psychologists, children reach an important development stage at the age of 10. So this is why researchers like Curtin and Dalberg tell us that the age of 10 is crucial time in the development of attitudes towards and groups perceived as other, according again to the research of Piaget, Lambert, and other psychologists. So at age 10, children are in the process of moving from egocentricity to reciprocity, and information received before age 10 is eagerly received. So the positive impact of cultural information at this age is, or before 10, is significantly enhanced when that information is experienced through foreign language and accompanied by experiences in culturally authentic situations. Another argument why learning a second language is important in the elementary years of children. So, which brings us to the second part of our distinction and looking at commonalities and complementarities between the Common Core standards and the actual national standards for learning languages seems logical and natural, and this is what ACT4 with the National Language Association have been working on these last few years. And recently, the organization ACT4 published a revised version of the National Standards for Language Learning to include common core language, a common language with the Common Core State Standards, with college and career readiness, and also with the 21st century skills. I mean, in this graph here, you can see in green everything which is, part of the Common Core State Standards, and in blue, the National Standard for Language Learning, and you see the commonality and the complementarity. I mean, both look at speaking and those 4 skills, which are reading, writing, speaking, and listening, and the meta-knowledge of language. We also know that Common Core State Standards for English language arts and literacy look at everything which is also connection, culture, comparison, communities, which is also supported by the actual guidelines. So there are a lot of commonalities, which mean that integrating actually both type of standards into curriculum only makes sense. And here again, this is another argument to show that the language learning is really core to education and to learning for children, and not just something that you would add to the curriculum. Very quickly here, these are two examples of the document that has been published by ACT4, which shows the parallel and the alignment between the Common Core and the learning standards here for reading. And if you look at it, you see that the main standards are very similar. And the next one is about speaking and listening. And here again, the alignment between the two type of standards is pretty obvious, which shows that an integration of these standards in the development of our curriculum only makes sense. Another element that ACT4 integrated into their guidelines actually are also the 21st century skills. Here again, if we look at those 21st century skills, they enhance skills that we develop in language learning, but also that we develop with the Common Core standards. For instance, critical thinking, for instance, creativity, learning how to work collaboratively. So it also makes sense to integrate that into of curriculum development. A last quotation by the 21st Century Partnership: language education does not only contribute to students' career and college readiness, it is only through knowing the language of others that we can truly understand how they view the world, and this is what makes the language student a 21st century skilled learner. I mean, I think this is evidence here. So here we are going to look at some concrete examples. What it means in terms of the design of language courses. Here are just examples of several language courses that we have developed at Middlebury Interactive Languages, integrating all these concepts and all these research findings. The approach, the pedagogical approach, which is part of the design of our online courses or our language courses, is informed mainly by also the experience that we gain from the Middlebury language schools, who have been, offering language learning in immersion. So that whole notion of immersion is one of the key principles into our design. The notion of experiential, I mean, learning by doing, learning by using the language as I am doing something is also key in our design. Lifelong learning, I was speaking about critical thinking, about learning how to work collaboratively, about creativity. All of that is lifelong learning, and we have integrated that into our course design. Good thinking, because everything we do in language has to be embedded into its cultural reality to develop a global thinking in our students. So here again, this is key into our design. And cultural understanding, I mean, we cannot learn a language without, learning and understanding and interacting with the cultural realities of the language. So this is also key element into our course design. So which means that when we design our courses, again, we base ourselves on the research in second language acquisition, in the research on bilingualism that I've explained just before, to recreate the immersion for online materials means that we have used a lot of authentic materials, so a lot of authentic videos, and we went to different countries to videotape authentic people interacting in the language within their cultures, and then we use that into the design and development of our courses. Everything that we do is also based on the principle of exploration, which means that we give many opportunities to the students to explore concept, linguistic concept, cultural concept, and not just being explained, so that they are reacting to their learning. They also have opportunities to practice a lot what they are learning in terms of culture and language proficiency, but also to produce a lot, because we know that without production, we are missing something into the learning process. So a lot of projects are developed by the students, and as they are accomplishing those projects, they are learning the language and the culture. So these immerse, explore, practice, and produce are key to the design of our courses. Here, very quickly, a few examples. These are screenshots taken from a course that we have developed for French, for instance, for high school students. You can see on these screen capture that a lot of videos are there, and videos representing the diversity of the Francophone cultures. Some are from Senegal, some are from Quebec or Montreal, some are from France. So we try to show the diversity, the cultural diversity, but also the linguistic diversity of language. And students in these activities are asked to explore, to compare, and to connect the cultures and their own culture, to compare, and also to explore, to make hypotheses on what they are listening, what they are viewing through these videos. And our design supports the concept of islands of understanding, which means that we push the students to make hypotheses, to guess by looking at different clues, not only linguistic clues that they hear or see, but also all the visual clues, all their previous knowledge, or knowledge of the world, actually, and to bring all that together so that they can make informed hypotheses to get at the meaning of these documents. And all of that with a task-based design, which means that we bring students into activities where they replicate what they would do in real life. Here an example, very simple example of an activity where you have a student who's going to leave a message on a voicemail machine, very task-based, but he is using the language to do that. Or another activities where two students are calling each other, the videotape in France, two real students, calling each other, and they were discussing about different geographical characteristics of the Francophone world, and we created an activity where, one is asking, information about geographical details about the Francophone world, and the student is taking the place of the other one to feel this activity about, the Francophone world. So here again, each of our activities try to recreate an authentic task that a student would do in normal life. And at every step within the learning process, we also bring our students to think and reflect about their learning, and which means that they are asked at a regular moment to self-assess their performance, but also to reflect on the learning strategies that they have used, or to reflect on the next action after self-assessing. What will I do to improve? So all these elements which develop metacognitive skills and strategic skills in the learner, in the students, help him to become more and more autonomous learner, which is also in terms of cognitive development very important for children or young adolescents. And I'm going to finish with two last examples. Here is an example of a Chinese elementary courses that we developed on the same design that I was explaining earlier. And here, instead of using videos, we've used actually culturally authentic stories that, for instance, little Chinese children hear from their parents. So we selected different stories, and the story becomes the support and the base of many activities where the children are exposed to the language and are starting to explore the language and the culture. By doing that, we are developing, cultural reference in the mind of the children, which are similar to the cultural reference of a little Chinese child. And so the students exploring the oral language visually through those animated stories, through different texts, to get used more and more to the language. And we did exactly the same thing for the Spanish elementary course, again based on stories taken from the whole Hispanic world, which are stories which are, known and taught and read and sung actually to little children in the Hispanic world. So I'm saying here students are introduced through the authentic stories to more language that they will need in order to be successful in a given activity, but this is totally an immersion techniques which provide opportunities that encourage students to use the language appropriately beyond their current skill level. And the last thing, by using that diversity of stories or diversity of videos, we are also helping students to go very quickly beyond any stereotype that we can have about cultural communities speaking the language. Just by looking at the diversity of the ways of saying and the different cultures and cultural perspectives, we are just enriched by, and we cannot at any moment generalize and so stop at a stereotype, which is so a very important element. So here is the design, and now I'm going to ask Christina to tell us about actually concretely the experience of the students of our school using these courses. So Christina, this is you.
Okay, thank you. Hello, and thank you all for participating. I'm principal of Weybridge Elementary School, which is a K-6 school in rural Vermont. We've had a Spanish program in our school for 5 years and introduced the IL program in the spring of 2012 as blended model. So we have 2 days of direct instruction with a teacher in Spanish, and then we have a day where students are working online with the MIL program with the support of the Spanish teacher. They also have access at home and access at other times during the school week. So it is a mixed process or a blended process that we're using. I'm going to speak to the integration of the language program in connection with Common Core, how we've gone about that. And our primary goal of our work overall is to embed Spanish across the disciplines, math, science, social studies, music, etc. We do this in a number of ways that teachers meet regularly with the Spanish teacher to compare where content is and vocabulary, and we're having increased familiarity by the teachers with the MIL program so they understand the content there, can access that, and the pedagogical structure. One of the key ways in our overall process that we really look to the Common Core standards is looking at the practices in mathematics and the ELA capacities. To look at the next generation science, and now we're beginning to look at the college career civic life framework for social studies. But we're really looking at the practices and behaviors as our primary way of integrating our language and really getting leverage from the Common Core and our language program. What listed here are the examples of indicators from the capacities first of ELA, and where they're really examples of outcomes we've begun to observe in students who are learning Spanish, and points that we're beginning to work on assessing more systematically across the disciplines. The indicators that I listed, we're really limited to those, but those are ones that we have particular focus and have been really looking at for outcomes and thinking about assessment. So in the ELA, the capacities or the indicators, the first one demonstrates command of standard English and acquires and uses a wide range of vocabulary. What we found very quickly was that the emphasis on teaching academic vocabulary in the Common Core is really beautifully supported by the actual process or strategy for teaching and acquiring vocabulary in Spanish. And this is both in direct instruction and through the MIL, that you really need to think about visuals, repetition, reading, context, application, so that students are practicing with words in reading, writing, speaking, and listening. This supports metacognition about learning vocabulary and really noticing what's supportive. The student notices what helps them learn the vocabulary. Another very obvious place is the beginning of noticing and really explicitly pointing out cognates, both in direct instruction but also in the MIL process, that's really something that helps students to expand their vocabulary more rapidly because they're seeing the connections across the languages. This one, listening attentively to gain both general and discipline-specific knowledge. I think this is one of the most dramatic places of observation in a second language program, is that you get to see students listening in a very different way than they do when they think they should understand something. But as an example is that if students don't understand something in math, there are many reasons to mask that, to think about what's happening. The students are, there's some social issues potentially in that they should know it, everybody else knows it, I don't know it. But in the second language, there's not an assumption that it's something you should already know. And so there's a capacity to listen very closely for understanding in a new way. That the point is here to understand. It's not to uncover your misunderstandings. And so that is, having students have that experience both through MIL and direct instruction really means that their listening becomes a process that has to do with the reciprocity of communication. Somebody's speaking, I'm trying to understand, and vice versa. And this is something that we've begun to see and certainly are leveraging to carry over into other subjects. Noticing what listening is like in a second language as opposed to your local language. So that's just a huge piece in this process. Is an engaged and open-minded but discerning listener is really very much related to that, but the idea that carries over, and because of the materials that are in MIL that are exposing to new cultures and ways of thinking, ways of speaking, obviously, that there develops in that listening as well, not only the thing of do I understand, but some more openness to something is a different kind of thinking, way of doing things. This really, I think, comes up in the cultural piece as well, is that students are much more willing to listen now to people with accents. That in the past they might just turn that off, but if somebody has an accent, it's like, oh, I need to understand them. They have something more they can tell me, and that's not just different from me. When speaking, strives to make his or her meaning clear to the listener. This is again like the observation of as observing a student listening. Is this idea of great level of intention about the other person not understanding. If I don't say it very carefully and correctly, that person might not understand me. Again, very different than when you're communicating from one person who, in our culture, that would be English to English. There's the understanding that could occur might be because they're thinking about something differently. But this is that taking it again to, I need to have my word order correct. I need to choose the correct gender. I need to think about tense. I need to be real clear about my pronunciation, because if not, they might not understand me. And that's, again, something that's very, very significant to second language understanding, going into reciprocity, and that piece of moving out from the egocentric thought to the idea of theory of mind, that somebody else is having a different experience, understanding things differently than I do. Uses technology and digital media strategically and capably is a very big strength of the MIL, obviously. Students do gravitate to online programs. This has been very important to us in terms of watching an ongoing program where students are beginning to understand it as a learning tool and really a genre, that they need to think about how to navigate the program in order to support their learning. They also, and this is something that we've discovered as we go along, is that there's opportunities to really talk and understand about pedagogy through this, that there's a reason for the design of the program. There's not only a design that's to support learning and how do you learn from it, but beginning understanding that there's instructional methodology, that teachers are making those decisions with intention. This again leads to significant metacognition, but understanding self as learner, and that's really well supported by MIL. The other piece that is very significant is that as we move into the Common Core assessment, Vermont is involved in the Smarter Balanced assessment. That again is a genre that requires students to really work on several different levels and learn how to navigate the system and think about it, not as a closed-ended process where it's just fill in the blank, or if I get a single answer. It really means that students need to understand how to put information together and how to navigate the system. So we feel as though our students are well prepared for that without preparing them specifically for a test. Then the other piece, which is hugely important, is coming to understand other perspectives and cultures. The MIL program, which emphasizes so much of the authentic cultural experiences, and that the language is very rich and varied in its content, really brings about an awareness that other people are living different, having different experiences, that they speak Spanish, and many people speak Spanish in the world, and this isn't just a single culture that speaks Spanish. So there's this new layered or nuanced understanding. But in a community which is unilingual and we speak English, there is a piece for students that it's really quite a shock to the system, even though they know it intellectually, that actually other people do converse every life, thinking as complex and deep as everybody that they know in English, that's happening, and that's a really important discovery that again takes them outside of themselves and creates some disequilibrium that again can come back into balance as they experience it more. So for ELA, those are again some of the indicators that we're really working on now. There's many others that could go through. If we look at the reading indicators as well. But we also look at math, and I think that can sometimes be a stretch of thinking, how does the language support that? And I'm only touching on this briefly. These are actually the statements of the math, of some of the math practices, and not so much the indicators. But making sense of problems and perseverance in solving them, again, the reciprocity of speaking in a second language and listening to a second language, that listening and reading, making sense really trying to understand and to be understood has to do with perseverance, and it has to do with, in my thinking, with problem solving, that especially with the sentence construction, I think it goes the other way in terms of listening as well. But when students are trying to solve the problem of communicating something in a second language, it requires some of the very similar willingness to enter strategies to try out, but also to attend specifically to the rules of that language in order to be understood. And into that, the level of practice that comes through, and very particularly in the MIL program, is another indicator for students that in order to get become more proficient, you need to practice, you need to persevere. The attends to precision is very similar and related, that there's an understanding that there are rules and that you need to understand rules, parameters of what's to be solved in order to be understood, that you really need to manage that. That's a very strong intellectual process. Challenges himself or herself to communicate precisely with others. Again, go back to the challenge of being understood and to understand. There's a piece of the second language that has to do with taking risks, and one of the places that MIL very strongly supports that is that in the capacity to practice pronunciation, vocabulary, conversation, students are able to do that with the computer, and they gain confidence with that, and that confidence comes back into the classroom in their willingness to take risks, trying out, talking the larger group. But risk-taking carries over into other classrooms as well. It's, oh, I have a voice, I could try it out, and I can try it out. So it is, again, a very important part of the process. Looks for and makes use of structure, again, in the communication. One piece would be that students are, with systematic support from teachers, both in Spanish and other subject areas, really looking and noticing cognates. But again, the idea that there's sentence construction, word order, gender, verb tense, intonation that need to be attended to, and so that there's a structure that can be counted on but needs to be learned and noticed, really support, again, cross-curriculum. Those are ways that we have looked at really integrating and building on and enjoying the benefits of having a second language program and the access and use of the Middlebury Interactive Language Program.
Thank you, Christina. So, Liz, I think that now it's time for question and answer from the participants.
Okay, first question. I heard that immersion is the best way to learn a language. Can immersion be achieved online, and how does it relate to Common Core?
So, here's a challenge. I mean, yes, we know that immersion is a fantastic way to learn a language. We are used to face-to-face immersion. We are used to go in a country and be immersed. Or at Middlebury College for almost 100 years, actually, we offer every summer some immersion program on campus where we recreate linguistic and culturally, the environment for the language. But how do we do that online? That was the big challenge. And immersion means that you are exposed to a lot of language, to the authenticity of the language, but with, for different types of interaction with different types of speakers. And so how could we do that? So this is why we decided to use a lot of videos. So this is why for the Chinese course, the French course, the Spanish course, we went into across the world and videotaped real people in different interactions, in different situations of communication, and we videotaped them, and we used these videotapes as the basis for all the activities that we've built for our online courses. So for the Spanish course, we went to Argentina, we went to Mexico, we went to Spain, we went also to Florida for the Cummins Cuban community, also in New York for the Spanish community. For French course, we went to Senegal, we went to Quebec, we went to France, we went to Guadeloupe. For China, we went to China. But so that was for the way to recreate that immersion through, the use of those videos, and but then the way we use them, the type of task that we design, the type of activities, everything is task-based, because again, in an immersion environment, you are not learning the language, you are using the language, and as you use the language, this is how the learning happens. Through the interactions that you have with the native people, this is how bit by trial errors, in fact, that you are gaining a better understanding of language and acquiring the language. So which means that with videos, we designed fully task-based activities, recreated, the reality of what somebody could do in real life with the language, and project-based also elements into our courses. So for that, students can collaborate together to create and produce a project. And through the collaboration, through the interaction, the negotiation that people have, to create. I mean, when you create together, you have to agree on things, you have to decide, you make a lot of decisions, in fact. You have to prioritize, look for resources. So as you are doing that, you are using the language and learning the language. So this is what we do in real life. So this is how we recreated an immersive environment online. How does it fit with Common Core? All these decisions that you have to make, all the the research that you have to do, prioritize the research, all the negotiation, presenting in different ways, solving problems, looking at written, oral, video resources, all of that, in fact, are integrated Common Core into your learning process. So, as I was saying in the presentation, Common Core standards and language learning standards are fully integrated if you are learning the language as you are using it, in fact. So this is how we, we design those online courses to take benefits of these dynamics, in fact, immersive dynamics. Tina, do you want to add something?
Well, I think that it's related, that one of the benefits for us with MIL is that students can use the program at home. And so it's increasing the exposure. It does mimic immersion to a certain level, but it also takes it into our community, and parents are hearing it and seeing it, and in some cases building on it as well. So that isn't possible just with the language course within the walls of the school. It functions in a very different way.
Next question. I've been using video in my classroom for years. How is your video different from things I can find on YouTube or other common sources?
Well, what's interesting with our videos is that they are authentic. They are authentic. I mean, we went to the countries and we videotaped these different people, authentic native people in their authentic environment, cultural authentic environment. But because it is a language course, we needed to have people interacting in diversity of situations of communication. So what we did is that we were telling these people, okay, we would need to have interaction of people, as they are eating, for instance. So we would just, ask them to, discuss what they would normally discuss, around the table as they are eating, and we would videotape them. We did the same thing when we needed, to have some interaction for units where you are buying something. So either counting, the money that you exchange as you are buying, or looking in clothing store, and because we needed to have that vocabulary about different type of clothes, and so we would just videotape these people as they are going into those different stores and interacting with the different people working in the store and buying stuff and paying the staff. And so we would put these people in different situations and just videotape them. Nothing is scripted. We never gave any script to these people. We just gave them the situations and filmed them into these situations. So it means that we have, of course, the necessary diversity of situation of communication that a language course has to have, but we've kept the authenticity of the document because we never scripted anything. And also because we went and videotaped on site. I mean, again, when you buy something in Guadeloupe, it's different than buying something in Paris or buying something in the south of France. And we went into those three different places. So we kept the cultural authenticity, we kept the authenticity of language and the authenticity of the situation. We just organized them in a way. This is how I would say that they are different from, some videos that you can find in YouTube. And I do think a lot of teachers enjoy our videos because they actually find in it something that they have a hard time, or it would take them a long time to collect, from YouTube, for instance.
This is a question for Christina. What role do native speakers play in authenticity in the program?
In the program, the MIL program, or in our overall program?
Overall program.
Okay. Clearly in the MIL program, that's just been spoken to. That's a very significant piece that expands that experience for students hugely that we would not be able to do. We do have speakers or guests come in who are Spanish speaking from different cultures, and we try to do that on a fairly regular basis. We also have school-wide cultural events, either performers or in the near future we're going to play in Burlington. That's a Mexican story that we will all learn about, read about, and have a shared experience, both cultural and in terms of the language.
What types of activities and projects do students engage in at the school to demonstrate their language abilities? Are culminating performances at different points in the different curricular areas?
So I'll give you one example of that is that last year our fourth graders put on a play that had been written with the Spanish teacher, and it was based on rainforest animals. The main characters were rainforest animals, which had to do with both science and social studies project that students had done. It expanded into art, and that the art teacher worked with another class doing large pictures that told the story, and then the older students also really wrote out the story that was being told by the play. So it crossed over in several different ways. The students in the fourth grade then memorized the play, they created their costumes, they practiced, and I think one of the things that was most interesting in the process was when they got halfway through, they said, we really want our parents to come to that, and then it became a dilemma because it was like our parents don't understand Spanish. So what are we going to do? So in that process of developing the play and practicing, they figured out they had to really work hard at making the play understandable to people who didn't speak Spanish. So they started thinking about repetition, the level of animation, volume, expression, histrionics, ways of getting their meaning across that would allow people to understand them with no Spanish or limited Spanish. And so that was an example of a piece where the students really demonstrated the understanding that what they were doing was trying to communicate, And that took thought in itself. And so that's the kind of thing we really try to work at, is developing culminating activities that will bring up this larger understanding for students.
The course itself, I mean, each unit normally ends with a specific project, which is, in terms of its theme, is linked to the unit. But to be able to realize the project, the students have to reuse everything they've learned in terms of the language, in terms of the culture, to produce that project. So one very quick example is that at the end of a unit where the students have learned everything about leisure, about sports, and they've looked at, through documents that we have, sports in the different parts, for instance, of the Francophone world, and they have to themselves imagine, create a new sport, but to do that they have to make a certain number of decisions, for instance, is it a collaborative sport or individual sport? What type of equipment you need? What type of the rules? What does it mean to win or not or lose in that sport? And they are reviewing and looking at all the different videos that they've looked at already about different sports played in the Francophone world, to inspire themselves to create their own, and again reuse everything that they've learned through the unit. So that's one little example of a project. But as you see, as they are doing the project, they are negotiating, they are agreeing, not agreeing, they are looking at different resources, video resources, print resources, internet resources, to be able then to produce this project. So that's another example of it.
We have time for just one more question. How in a student's education plan should world languages be incorporated? What are the consequences of waiting until high school and only mandating 2 years of the same language?
We know, and research has always showed us, that the earlier you start, the better, and it'll be easier in a way. The way that a child is going to learn a language is going to be different from the way, an adolescent or an adult is going to learn the language. So we would say the earlier the better. But it's not because you cannot, learn a language when you are young that you are lost and that you will never be able to learn a language anymore. That's not true. I mean, even though we speak about, that critical period hypothesis, we know very well that even if you start as an adolescent, you can really develop extremely good high level of proficiency in language and in the culture, but your way of learning is going to be different. And maybe here, the way you're going to reason about the language, the way you're going to look at the structure of a language is going to be completely different than a young child who is not at all, in a way, rationalizing, the structure of a language. So different ways of learning, but maybe easier as a younger child to learn a language, but still very possible as an adolescent or also as an adult. I think it all means the type of exposure that you have, in that language, and this is where the materials that you use to learn the language are going to be important. What you do with the language is also have to have an impact on the way you learn the language. So as an adult and as an adolescent, the more you are project-based, task-based, and exposed to the authenticity of the language and of the culture, is going to help you to learn the language. When you speak about those 2-year requirements, I think that's a shame. It's too bad, because we've just said through this whole hour, we've explained the benefits of learning a language, not only because you know another language and culture, but all these other benefits in terms of cognitive development and also your own perception as a citizen in this global world. Okay, so having only 2 years, for language for that requirement, it's a shame. I think we should push to languages as early as we can, but also as long as we can, because we are living in a global world where cultural diversity is important, is what represents the richness of our world, and be able to understand the other one is important. One thing also is that the United States is extremely diverse in terms of language and in terms of culture. I mean, our communities are extremely diverse, and being able to understand the other one, your neighbor, not only through the language, but also understand the different cultural perspective that that person has, I think is important in any society. So 2 years of language is not enough. But there is no, age where you should say, oh, I'm too old and I cannot learn the language. I don't believe that. Christina, you want to say something?
So there's 2 pieces that I think are really important. One is that there are strong indicators that the earlier you begin, the more likely you are to go forward and become fully proficient in a second language, that the capacity for people to sort of lose interest, stop, is later when there's a shorter span later. But the other part is that if as elementary schools we really want to make the gains that seem to be really clearly indicated cognitively for students and regarding executive functioning, you want to start that as early as possible so you can benefit and leverage what learning a second language can do for the individual as a student. And that's across socioeconomic, it's for everybody. So I'm strongly an advocate of as early as possible.
Okay, that is all we have time for today. So thank you, Aline. Thank you, Christina, very much for all that great information. Thank you all attendees for joining as well. As you can see, Aline's contact information is up there. As a follow-up, just a reminder, you'll get a follow-up email with a link to the archive and a copy of the slides. So if there's any last-minute thing you want to say, go ahead and say them.
I just want to thank you all for your participation, and yes, go for it, learn language.
Same from Christina.
Thank you, guys. Thank you for joining us.
Okay.
Thank you.